So we want to thank KPEL for hosting this, and Mark and Jeremiah for their diligent work, Nathan Norris and Pat Trahan for working with us in a good spirit with the community to find out more about the comprehensive plan. Bernie is the voice of KPEL, no doubt. We all know who she is. She's been on the radio for 19 years, and when you look at her bio, she says she loves news, politics, and loves to talk, so she's got the perfect job. So let me welcome Bernadette Lee, and she's going to be the moderator.
Thank you, Joyce. I appreciate it. I just want to let y'all know that we are live on the radio, so those folks are joining us now, of course, at KPEL 96.5. So with that, having said that, just keep in mind when we go to our question and answer portion this evening, just remember to mind our P's and Q's, I guess would be a good thing because it is live radio as well this evening. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I know we'll be expecting some more people as well. And we're really looking forward to this, as Mr. Richard was saying, about opening our minds. And it is about opening our minds and our hearts. Listening to these two presentations by these two gentlemen who have come together to do this for all of us tonight, and to really delve into some of the issues. And people said, well, what about this question and answer period? Well, you know, the question and answer period, we're hoping for everybody to get involved, even if you think your question is something that might have already been covered. Don't be shy. Definitely raise your hand when we get to that portion and ask your question. You know, your perception on what's happening with Plan Lafayette, or your perception of what you want for the city of Lafayette, may be completely different from mine. Maybe you want something in particular. So definitely bring those questions forward with you this evening. I want to say a thank you also to Ken Romero and Dr. John Sutherland for letting us be a part of their afternoon show tonight. And, of course, we have two gentlemen here who are going to be giving presentations tonight, and I want to tell you a little bit about both of them. We decided to make it easy for logistical purposes. We're going to let Mr. O'Toole go first this evening. But the two gentlemen here on my left, Randall O'Toole is a Cato Institute Senior Fellow working on urban growth, public land, and transportation issues. O'Toole's research on national forest management, culminating in his 1988 book, Reforming the Forest Service, has had a major influence on Forest Service policy and on-the-ground management. His analysis of urban land use and transportation issues, brought together in his 2001 book, The Vanishing Automobile and Other Urban Myths, has influenced decisions in cities across the country. In his book, The Best Laid Plans, O'Toole calls for repealing federal, state, and local planning laws and proposes reforms that can help to solve some of the social and environmental issues without any heavy-handed government regulation. O'Toole's latest book is American Nightmare: How Government Undermines the Dream of Home Ownership. O'Toole is the author of numerous Cato papers. He's also written for Regulation magazine, as well as op-eds and articles for numerous other national journals and newspapers. O'Toole travels extensively and has spoken about free market environmental issues in dozens of cities. An Oregon native, O'Toole was educated in forestry at Oregon State University and in economics at the University of Oregon. Please help me welcome Randall O'Toole. Thank you, sir.
My mic, and it's going to take just a second to update the electronics here. There we go. Everybody gets to see a picture of my beautiful dog. Where's the mouse? There we go. Okay. Well, Plan Lafayette, which isn't visible on the screen here yet. Plan Lafayette attempts to look comprehensively at the city and parish of Lafayette and look ahead into the future and see what it needs. The problem with this is that government planners can't predict the future. They can't look comprehensively at the city, and they can't figure out what the city and parish really need. Okay, and we... How come it's showing up here, but it's not showing up there?
And if you're just joining us on News Talk 96.5 KPEL, this is our event concerning Plan Lafayette, and you can join us here at the Light Center. The address for the Light Center is 537 Cajun Dome Boulevard, and you can certainly come down here. There will be a question and answer phase at the end of our presentation this evening. AOC is also here to record the event, and we're going to record it on KPEL so that you can get the audio tomorrow if you're interested in it as well. And if you would like to join us, of course, the doors are open. It is a free event for the public. Randall O'Toole will begin his presentation very soon. Also, Chuck Marohn will have his presentation a little bit later on in the evening. Each gentleman will give their presentation. Following each presentation, each of the gentlemen will then have a chance to basically have a 10-minute rebuttal where they share their thoughts about the other's presentation. And then following that, we'll have a series of questions and answers. And we'll talk a little bit about any of the issues that are important to you as citizens, whether it has to do with the transportation issue or some other issue. So you can feel free to come here to the event and join us for the question and answer phase of our presentation this evening. And if you are just joining us, it's News Talk 96.5 KPEL. As we wait for the presentation to continue and get everything set up, I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening and for the folks who decided to come out to this event. I think the biggest part of being able to do events like this particular event is the fact that we are coming together as a community, and everyone will be able to assist another person by hearing that person's presentation. So it's not just one side of a particular issue. Often people may tend to feel a little bit intimidated because they feel as if they've only heard one side of the issue, so they don't know if they've learned as much as they possibly can about a particular issue. So tonight's presentation begins now with Randall O'Toole, and we hope to do more presentations like this in the future. Mr. O'Toole?
All right, well, I apologize for that technical glitch, but we've got it all working now. Imagine you were living in Lafayette in 1915 instead of 2015, and you're writing Plan Lafayette at that time. And you're looking around and you're saying, what? Do we have, I guess not. There we go. You're looking around and saying, what does Lafayette need in the next 10 to 20 years? Well, you look around and you say, well, there's this newfangled form of transportation called streetcars. And they have them in New Orleans, and they even have them in Lake Charles. Well, we don't have one here in Lafayette. So we need to have a streetcar. So let's build some streetcars in Lafayette. The problem is that you may not realize it, but up north in Detroit, in Dearborn, Henry Ford is mass producing millions of Model T Fords, and within 10 years, more than half of all American families are going to have an automobile. And Lake Charles is going to tear out its streetcar because nobody wants to ride the streetcar anymore. So you just spent a whole lot of money on the wrong thing. Okay, today we are on the verge of another transportation revolution. It's called self-driving cars. And Google and Volkswagen and Ford and a whole bunch of other companies are developing self-driving cars, and within 5 years, you'll be able to drive a car like this one that can drive on city streets, on highways. You can get in the car and say, take me to work, take me to Grandma's house. You can put your dogs in the car and send them to the vet. People won't be complaining about single occupancy vehicles. They'll be complaining about zero occupancy vehicles. Driverless cars are going to revolutionize our lives as much as a Model T Ford revolutionized the lives of our great-grandparents 100 years ago. And yet, I don't see anything in Plan Lafayette or any other plan written in this country for a metropolitan or city area about self-driving cars and about what those cars are going to do. Instead, what are cities doing? Atlanta just built a streetcar. Dallas is building a streetcar. Portland is building a streetcar. 120-year-old technology, and they're saying this is for a 21st century city. It's not. It's obsolete, it's outdated, it's a waste of money. Plan Lafayette, fortunately, isn't proposing a streetcar, but one of the goals is to reduce single occupancy vehicle use and get people out of their cars and onto transit. Why? Transit is really expensive. Driving a car, Americans spend about 25 cents a passenger mile driving a car. If you just count local roads, almost all the subsidies to roads are local, in city and parish, and the local subsidies are about 4 cents a passenger mile in Louisiana. So we're talking about almost 30 cents a passenger mile. By comparison, Lafayette Transit is almost $1 a passenger mile, more than 3 times as expensive as driving on local city streets and parish roads. So talking about getting people out of their car and onto transit means getting people out of cheap transportation and onto expensive transportation. And it's not any greener. Even though they may have a few green buses, the average Lafayette transit bus uses as much energy or more energy per passenger mile than the average car. Despite the fact that transit is more expensive and less green than driving, we see places like Washington State passing a law mandating a 50% reduction in per capita driving. If they achieve that, then per capita driving in Washington will be less than in Puerto Rico. And we see in Plan Lafayette all kinds of things, and we see on my opponent's website all kinds of things demonizing the automobile, saying we have to slow down cars, we have to take away lanes of traffic and give them to bicycles. They say, Mr. Marohn says, these kinds of roads, which he calls stroads, but are formerly called arterials, are dangerous. And these kinds of roads, which he calls streets, but are formerly called collectors, are less dangerous. So we need to take these kinds and turn them into these kinds. Have lots of bike paths and wide sidewalks and lots of places where you're going to be stuck in traffic. The problem is that's not what the data show. If we look at New York, it's true that arterials are a little more dangerous than collectors, but locals are far more dangerous than any one. But here in Louisiana, local roads and collector roads are both more dangerous than arterial roads. So moving from collectors to local roads, or from arterials to collector roads, which is what he's advocating, will create more dangerous conditions, not less dangerous. The reality is that cars are safer, they're cleaner, and they're more fuel efficient every year, and these trends are expected to continue for as long as in the future as we can foresee. So within 10 years, cars will be more fuel efficient than the most efficient mass transit system in America. Automobiles also have brought to us huge benefits. Just look at the mobility changes because of the automobile. Back in 1915, there was almost no driving, and total mobility per person was about 1,000 miles a year. Today, the average American travels 18,000 miles a year, 85% of it by car. And if you didn't have cars, you wouldn't be able to have that mobility because other kinds of transportation are just too expensive. Transit, intercity rail, and so on are just way too expensive compared to driving. Because driving is so cheap, we are far more mobile because it's fast. We can reach far more jobs. Incomes have exploded in the last century because of that increasing accessibility and mobility. And yet the cost of driving has remained constant. Even though the amount of driving has exploded, the amount that we spend of our incomes that we spend on driving has remained almost exactly 9%, plus or minus 1% or so, for the past 50 or 60 years. Driving has also given us access to lower cost consumer goods, better housing, all kinds of things. Notice the huge jump in home ownership rates because of the increasing automobile ownership gave people access to cheap land at the urban fringe where they can buy it, build a house, and live in it. Now, home ownership is really important too. This is Steve Jobs, the house that Steve Jobs grew up in. Famously, he started the Apple computer business in his garage. More importantly, people who own houses can borrow money against the equity in their house and start small businesses, and that's how most small businesses get started. Even more importantly, children in homes that are owned by their parents do better in school than children in homes that are rented. And that's especially true for low and middle income people. It's not so much true for high income people. So for low and middle income people, home ownership rates are really important. And anything you do that makes housing more expensive and drives down home ownership rates is going to hurt children. So Plan Lafayette says we want to encourage people to live in high density. We want them to live in apartments rather than in houses, in single-family homes. Now, there's a market for this. It's a small market. There's a market for this kind of living. I think it's kind of probably close to being saturated in Lafayette. But we don't need the government saying you need to get more people living that way. In my former hometown of Portland, they said 65% of families are living in single-family homes. We are going to, as a target, reduce that to just 41%. And getting the rest of the people will live in multifamily homes. Now, it turns out 17 out of 20 people living in single-family homes own their homes. 17 out of 20 people living in multifamily homes rent. So a war on single-family homes is effectively a war on home ownership and will effectively reduce the ability of people to do things like start small businesses, put their kids through school, and so on and so forth. By the way, Portland's great model of increasing densities and building lots of transit is a distinct failure. Between 2008 and 2013, Portland gained 21,500 new jobs, and negative 1,000 of them took transit to work, meaning 1,000 fewer people were taking transit to work in 2013 than in 2008. So all the money they spent on transit has been a big waste. Plan Lafayette also has the goal of conserving farmland and open space. Why? 95% of Louisiana is farmland and open space. Why do you need to conserve it? Only about 40% of the farmlands in Louisiana are being used for growing crops. And most of our major crops, the per acre productivities are growing faster than our population. So the amount of land we need for farming is actually declining. So why do we need to impose high-density housing on people to save something that's already tremendously overly abundant? It's ridiculous. The whole idea of increasing densities is absurd. If people want to live in high density, they can move to New York, they can move to San Francisco, but we don't need to have government coming into Lafayette or other places and saying, we're going to increase your density. Increasing density means increasing housing costs. It means reducing housing affordability. Right now, according to Coldwell Banker, a middle-class home in Lafayette costs an average of $114 a square foot. You're already having a hard time competing against Lake Charles, which is only $100 a square foot, and you're heading on your way towards Austin, which has a comprehensive plan much like yours. And in Austin, they're spending $185 a square foot for homes. And then there's San Jose, $388 a square foot for homes. I don't think you're going to get there anytime soon, but that's really the model you're working towards. San Jose has been doing comprehensive planning since 1970. So the longer you do it, the more expensive housing gets. Another problem with comprehensive planning is it makes traffic worse. They say, oh, we've got congestion, we have to have comprehensive planning, and yet the things that the comprehensive planners always propose make congestion worse. For example, high-density housing doesn't take cars off the streets. Instead, it compresses them into a few streets where the high-density housing is located, making for more traffic congestion. Another problem with planning is that it encourages planners to become developers. It encourages them to write detailed prescriptions, such as these prescriptions in the Lafayette Unified Code for downtown buildings. 25% transparent glazing, meaning you have to have so many windows on your storefronts. You have to have the awnings have to look a certain way. You have to have certain setbacks. Your buildings have to be, the floors have to be 2 feet above the ground level. All of these rules that are going to make it more expensive and actually eliminate the natural characteristics of your community that make it interesting. So if your goal is to have a big auto wreck your economy, and burn up the American dream, then comprehensive planning is the way to go. But if your goals are something else, then you need to look at other techniques. I'm just about out of time now, but maybe in a later discussion we'll be able to talk about those other techniques. Thank you very much.
Randall O'Toole, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. And as we're getting set up here, I want to introduce to you Chuck Marohn. He is an engineer, planner, and president of the nonprofit organization Strong Towns. He has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's of urban and regional planning, both from the University of Minnesota. He's the author of 2 books, Thoughts on Building Strong Towns and a World-Class Transportation System, both of which look at the financial implications of our development pattern. He writes for Strong Towns as well as the American Conservative magazine. In addition to hosting his own weekly podcast for the past 15 years, he's been the conservative commentator on KAXE's Making Sausage program. A veteran of the Minnesota Army National Guard, Chuck lives north of his hometown in Brainerd, Minnesota, with his wife, his 2 daughters, and his 2 dogs as well. If you are just joining us on News Talk 96.5 KPEL, this is our live presentation of Plan Lafayette, the 2 different sides. Randall O'Toole, we just had a moment to hear his presentation. Chuck Marohn now will begin his presentation. Each will get a 10-minute rebuttal period. If you would like to join us here at the Light Center, you certainly may still do so. 537 Cajun Dome Boulevard is the address. And just a reminder again to our folks who are joining us already here at the Light Center that it is a live broadcast. So just remember, no excited utterances. I'll now turn things over to Charles Marohn. Chuck, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Thank you, everybody who's listening. Thank you to Mr. O'Toole for agreeing to do this. I live in a small town in central Minnesota. I grew up on the farm, homesteaded by my great-great-grandparents. Went to the University of Minnesota, became an engineer, came back to my hometown and started working. I work for cities. I work for developers. I built sewer systems, water systems, roads, streets, sidewalks, all the stuff that comprises the places in which we live. I believed very firmly in what I was doing. I believed I was building the American dream. I was giving people opportunity. I was giving people places to build new homes, places to create jobs, places to create wealth. I was working largely for cities and places that were very successful, that were doing really well, that had a lot of growth. Yet I found again and again and again that we didn't have any money. Didn't have any money to do basic things. These aren't big bloated governments. These were largely small towns, places with real tight, lean budgets, places where you bootstrap everything that you do. And I found again and again we were going out for grants. We were going to the federal government and the state government. We were playing the political game. We were hiring lobbyists. We were trying to do all this stuff we could do to piece together just basic things. How do we maintain a street? How do we maintain a sidewalk? How do we fix this pipe under this road that is leaking? And I started at one point to ask questions about what I was doing. Why is this, despite all the growth, not creating the prosperity that I thought it was, that I thought it should? And I started really with my own house. I did an analysis. The city had come out and paved the road in front of my house, and I looked at it, and I knew how much it cost. I'm an engineer. I figured it out. I went to the meetings. I knew how much it cost. I knew how much I paid, and I had my tax statement. And I looked at it, and I said, wow, based on the taxes that I'm paying on my place, it's going to take the city 37 years to recoup the money they just spent to pave my road. Now, the road won't last that long, but the finances of the city says it's going to take them that long just to break even. I started looking at other properties where we were working. This one was built in the early 1980s. The developer paid for all the infrastructure. It was rolled into people's housing prices and their mortgages. The city took on the long-term liability to fix it and maintain it. A generation later, they had to go out and make good on that promise. They spent $354,000. And you look at the taxes being paid by the people in that development, what you find is that it's going to take the city 79 years to recoup that expenditure. That's vastly longer than what the road is actually going to last. We asked the question, all right, let's pretend we were going to raise enough money from these people here between now and the time the road fell apart again to actually have the money to fix it. What would that mean? It would mean an immediate 46% increase in taxes and annual increases of 3% over inflation every year for the next 25 years. And that was just for the road. I looked at commercial developments. I was working for a city that had a business park that was very successful. They had built this business park and they had opened it up, and developers had come in and they had built different places, and it was completely full, and they were looking, saying, we want to build the same exact thing right on property we own next door. And we looked at the numbers and said, all right, if we did that, the exact same amount of money with the exact same return, how would that work? And it would take the city 30 years to break even on this. 30 years if every single new property developed instantly with no subsidies, which every single one in there had been tax subsidized, either TIF or some other type of tax subsidy. And every single penny of this revenue went to paying off this loan. That assumed that the rest of the taxpayers in the city would have their taxes go up to pay to plow the snow off the roads and mow the ditches and provide police protection and fire protection and every other service that would be needed. And that was in the most wildly optimistic of scenarios. I started to put this together and I realized what was going on. What was going on is that it was very easy for us as engineers, very easy for us as city officials, very easy for us as a public to create new things, to create new growth, to add and expand, to add more sewer systems, add more water systems. What was really hard was finding the money to fix things. And there's a good reason for that. When a developer comes out and builds everything and they can get, subsidized money, they can get low interest rates, they can sell those off to individuals with mortgages, have that cost wrapped up in the mortgage. Again, subsidized transaction. When those things happen, the city takes on this long-term obligation. We'll fix the street. We'll maintain the pipe. And when you look at the cash flow for the city, what you see is that in those early years, it's all positive, right? We haven't paid anything. The developer paid it all. We're just bringing in money. We're just getting richer and richer and richer. The problem is when you get out a generation and you have to actually go out and make good on that promise, what you find is that the productivity of the development pattern, the way we've actually laid out these places and built them, doesn't generate enough wealth and enough prosperity to actually cover those costs. And so over the long term, from a cash flow standpoint, the city runs far into the negative. What do we do to deal with this? We all know what we do, right? We try and get more growth. Because the more growth we get, the more cash we have, the more money we've got to do all the things we want to do. And so we develop this growth mantra. Let's go get more growth. Let's go get more growth. And if we take that last development and stack those on top of each other year after year after year, we get a cash flow that looks something like this. And yes, when we get out a generation and we have to make good on that very first promise, we've had all this growth, we take the money and we can fix things. But what happens over time? When we lose money on every transaction, we don't make it up on volume. When we lose money on every project that we do, even though we're growing very fast, we outrun our cash. And from a cash flow standpoint, we go far, far into the negative. Cities are stuck in this trap. They get into the second life cycle, they start taking on debt, they start doing all the little Ponzi scheme games that you do to try to gin up more growth. Well, we'll get some tax subsidies here, we'll go get this federal grant here, we'll try to get this interchange here so we can get some quick growth. And in the process, they take on more and more and more liabilities. I started asking, well, this is a disaster. What actually works? And as I'm searching around for an answer to this question, I come across this photo of my hometown. This is my hometown back in 1904. This is not a great place, right? This was not a perfect place. I'm sure they had problems with their sewer systems and their water systems just like we do. But the one thing about this place that's different than our cities today is that they built this on their own. They built this out in the middle of nowhere. This place is 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul today. It is the middle of the boondocks back then, right? These people built this out in the middle of nowhere, little bit by little bit by little bit. They didn't have the federal subsidies. They didn't have the tax increment financing. They didn't go build a bunch of infrastructure hoping they could get growth. They didn't take on all kinds of liabilities for the promise tomorrow. They built it slowly over time. As we have embraced this new development pattern, the pattern that we now call the American dream, the one I was out building as an engineer, we've taken places like this, and here's the exact same street today. We've seen this in cities all over the country, right? It's a wasteland of parking lots and half-occupied buildings. And if you want to understand in one snapshot why cities all over this country, including Lafayette, are struggling financially, know that there's $500,000 of public infrastructure sitting in that street. Where's the wealth that is going to sustain that generation after generation? We see this pattern over and over again. These are two identical lots in my hometown. If you look at them, they're exact same size, same area, same amount of public infrastructure. The one on the left is an old and blighted block. The city has actually labeled it that. They want to get it torn down. 2 blocks over, it used to look the exact same. They had that one torn down, and now we got the brand new taco drive-thru, right? It's modern, it's shiny, it meets everyone's vision of what success is. The only problem is no one ever did the math. Because when you do the math, you find out that that block with the shiny and new actually gives the city far less taxes. That old, blighted, rundown, junky block that was built 100 years ago by my great-great-grandparents and their contemporaries actually pays the city a higher rate of return. For the same amount of area, the city gets 42% more taxes. And when we look over time, we did this analysis in 2012. When we look what's happened over the past 2 years, what we see is that property values don't hold their value in our new way of building, the way that they did in the way we built years and years ago. We see the same kind of thing on the edge of our communities. This is our big box store. This is our double-sized big box with an auto dealership, gas station. This is the most expensive, valuable piece of property in the entire area. This is the same amount of area in our core downtown. Our rundown. If you ever saw the movie Fargo, it depicts a not so flattering but not so inaccurate portrayal of my hometown of Brainerd, Minnesota. A lot of second and third stories unoccupied. A lot of rotating tenants in the first stories. But what do we see from a financial standpoint? The same area, the same amount of space. We see that old traditional development pattern, the way people built literally for thousands and thousands of years, has a much, much higher financial return. There's a reason people built this way. It's because they could viably maintain it generation after generation after generation. We spent a couple $100 million on this. Highway bypass, running sewer out here, water out here, frontage roads, backage roads, all this stuff. And we called this growth. And for a long time, our budget was really flush because this made us feel really good, right? But that bill is coming due. And in the process of ginning up growth and creating some short-term jobs, what did we do? We took on enormous long-term liabilities. Liabilities that we do not have the tax base to sustain. We see this pattern of development in city after city after city. My friend Joe Minicosi is sitting up here. These are some maps he put together. This is Buffalo, New York, one of those cities that was hollowed out after World War II, right? And when we plot the wealth, the prosperity to be created, the actual tax base per acre of this city in the vertical, what we see is that everywhere we have a traditional development pattern, everywhere we have buildings that were built prior to this whole post-war experiment that we've now kind of called the American dream, every time we have that, we see enormous financial prosperity. This is a little bit smaller town in upstate New York. We have the same kind of pattern. This is a little place by where I live, little city of Crosby, 1,200 people. When I went there, they said, Chuck, these neighborhoods we've got here are in serious decline. This stuff out here on the edge is where all the action is. We want to get more of that. And then we showed them, hey, all of your wealth are in those neighborhoods that you're undervaluing. They're in those neighborhoods. Those are the places that are producing and have produced for you for decades your solid tax base. When we run the numbers in Lafayette, we see the same exact pattern. The same exact pattern. This is your city here. And this is analysis that Joe and I have done. And when you look at the green, what you're looking at are places, development patterns where you as a taxpayer, you as a population, you as a city, as a community, get more revenue back than you actually spend long term in service and maintenance. The places where you see red, which are all the stuff you've built post-World War II, all the stuff you've had growth over the last generation, all that stuff is bleeding red ink over the long term. We have had 2 generations of growth in this pattern, in this style, that changes and asks us to exchange at the local level a short burst of growth and a short burst of jobs for enormous long-term liabilities. Plan Lafayette actually takes this on and actually says, you know what? We may not have every answer. We may not know everything we're doing. But boy, business as usual is not working for us. The way we've been doing things, kind of the way things have been going on, that doesn't work. We're in some serious financial problems. We've got to look at things differently. And I'll tell you what, if you're thinking, do we need a plan here or not? I want to show you, this is that last image. This right here is your MPO's projection for where growth is going to happen over the next 20 years. This is their plan. Now, who's the MPO? The Metropolitan Planning Organization. That's the federal entity essentially created to channel gas tax dollars from the federal and state government to you. They've got a plan for you. They've figured out where your growth is going to go. It's going to go in all those areas that are bankrupting you. You need your own plan. You need to control your own future. You need to make your own decisions. And I'm not going to stand up here and say Plan Lafayette has 0 faults, but I'm telling you, It is a huge step in the right direction. Thank you.
And thank you, Chuck. Appreciate that. We're going to pause for a 10-second required station ID, if you'll just bear with us for about 10 seconds. We appreciate that. Ken's going to do that back at the studio. News Talk 96.5 KPEL is presenting Plan Lafayette. Two experts here to discuss the variety of different issues. Chuck Marohn is an engineer planner and the president of the nonprofit organization Strong Towns. Randall O'Toole is a Cato Institute senior fellow working on urban growth, public land, and transportation issues. These gentlemen coming to Lafayette to give their presentations. We shall now begin with Mr. O'Toole's rebuttal. Mr. O'Toole?
Mr. Marohn's presentation was extremely logical, extremely rational, and totally horrifying to me, because it puts the needs of the city treasury above the needs of the citizens who live in that city and the citizens who in the future will live in that city. It says, if the city has a screwed up tax system that doesn't collect taxes from everybody fairly, well, then we're going to create an unfair city and emphasize the parts of the city that collect the most taxes. If wealthy people pay more taxes than poor people, we're going to push the poor people out and bring more wealthy people in. If meat markets pay less taxes than produce stores, then we're going to try to force more people to become vegetarians. Or if you're already a vegetarian, I don't know, are there any vegetarians in Louisiana? Then I would say if produce stores produce less revenue than meat markets, then we would try to force people to stop being vegetarians and becoming carnitarians. The point is, it's all based on revenues, it's all based on the current government cost structures, it's all based on the current government tax system, and accepts all that as a given, and then tries to reshape your lifestyles and your needs and your desires, just like they did in New London, Connecticut, where the city said, Suzette Kilo, you're a working class family, and all your neighbors are working class and you're not paying many property taxes, so we're going to take away your land and your houses and give it to a developer who will build high upper income houses, and they'll pay more property taxes, and they're more valuable to us than you are, and we're going to kick you out. As you may know, they never built those expensive houses, so now the site of her house has become a dump, but the Supreme Court said, yes, government taxes prevail over the needs of the city residents. I think that's horrifying. Instead of saying that, we need to look and see, what is your cost structure? What is your tax system? Maybe you need to change that to create a system that's really fair. Now, I want to start out showing you this picture of self-driving cars. This is a valet parking car. You go to a hotel or a restaurant or work, and you get out of your car and you say to your car, go park yourself. And it's got in its database all the available parking spaces. It wanders around until it finds one that's empty, and then it parks itself in there. When you're done with work or whatever, you pull out your smartphone and you pull up your app and you say, car, come, and it comes and picks you up. Just think about how that's going to transform everybody's lives. And if the government is out there saying, we need more density, and you've got a smart car, you can just say, well, I can live 100 miles away from here and commute to work, and I've got a little internet device on my car, and while it's driving me to work, I can work in my car, and I can get away from Lafayette Parish that's trying to force me to live in high-density housing, or trying to tell me I can only live in a single-family home if I'm willing to pay $400,000 or $500,000 for it. How are we going to pay for roads and things like that when we've got a screwed-up tax system that doesn't work very well? I think we need to fix it. Oregon, my home state, has got an experiment going where we're changing from gas taxes to mileage-based user fees. It sounds a little frightening at first. I was one of the first people to volunteer for the experiment, and they sent me this little device. I plug it into my car, and now it keeps track of everywhere I drive. But think about this. When I drove to the airport yesterday morning, I drove on a private road, a federal road, a county road, a state highway, and a city street. When I bought gasoline and paid for it with gas taxes, my gas tax went to the state. The state passed a little bit along to the city and county, none to the federal government for the federal road I drove on, none to the private entity for the private road I drove on, and the city and county didn't get enough either. So I ended up having to be subsidized by all these other entities. With a mileage-based user fee system, the fee I pay can go to the road that I'm driving on. It's like going into a grocery store, and I pay for the groceries I buy, not the groceries somebody else bought, or the money that I pay doesn't go to, if I buy milk, the money I pay doesn't go to the baker, it goes to the dairy, just like it should be. So with a better fee system, we won't need to worry about whether government's going to try to force us to become vegetarians or live in high-density housing, because somehow that's better for the city and parish treasury. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now Chuck will come back with his rebuttal.
It's funny because there's a part of me that feels like an old fogey. I realize I'm the younger in the debate, but no, the whole self-driving car thing, I don't get the fetish with self-driving cars. I'm like, what's a taxi, right? Like I call the car, it shows up, it picks me up, it drives me where I want to go. How is that like a radical transformation of our places? Nonetheless, there is an obsession in many places with self-driving cars. I don't think they're the revolution that people think they are, but nonetheless, I guess the future will be borne out. It will be very easy to transfer from the place we are now to the place of self-driving cars because we've built a world for cars, right? One of the things that Randall O'Toole indicated was that the policies of the city are going to drive up housing prices and make housing unaffordable. And I want to talk a little bit about that notion because again, this is one of these things that I don't understand. I am generally a libertarian, rather thinking person. I think at the federal level, and him and I have chatted before and debated before, at the federal level, I don't think we'd have a lot of agreement. I tend to see the federal government in local land use issues as the bull in the china closet, right? Doing a lot more harm than good. But when we get down to the local level, I'm more of a Mayflower Compact kind of conservative, right? The notion that we maybe can sit down around a table, talk about these things as rational people, get out of the ivory tower and look at the real world and say, wow, we've got some huge financial problems. These are real problems that real people are going to have to deal with. How do we deal with this? I want to talk about this issue, this idea that a free market is setting housing prices and somehow the city is going to impact that. A free market requires two fundamental aspects. The first is that prices for goods and services are going to be set by mutual consent between people. The second is that there's going to be no like an outside interference in the price being established through supply and demand from government or monopolies or any other entities. I want to look at that second one because the second one is the key important one here tonight. This is a graph of housing prices since the late 1800s. This is put together by an economist, Robert Schiller. And what he's done is he's tracked housing prices over time. You see in the Great Depression, prices went down. After World War II, we had the new way of building. We had this whole boom that took place, and prices went back up. We have a little bubble in the 70s, a little bubble in the 80s, and then, of course, we're all familiar with the huge run-up in housing prices after the dot-com crash, right? We understand this. And if you ask right-leaning economists to explain this, they'll say there were all kinds of federal interventions and subsidies that went amok. If you ask left-leaning economists to explain this, they'll say it's a lack of regulation, a lack of oversight. I don't really care. The practical situation I want to look at is from 2008 on. What happened after this bubble, right? Because the notion that we're impacting housing prices, that the layout of the land that we see, that we identify as the American dream, is somehow, an expression of people in a free and open market making their preferences known is just, to me, absurd. When we look at like an entity like the Federal Reserve, and we study what their mandate is, their mandate is what? They're supposed to manipulate the economy to create jobs and growth, right? We have to keep unemployment down. We have to keep growth happening. And we're going to lower interest rates or buy, securities or do whatever we have to do to keep that going. When we think of what happened with the Federal Reserve after 2008 in regards to housing, what happened, right? We bailed out all the banks that made the bad loans. We bailed out all the insurance companies that made the bad loans. We, bailed out Fannie and Freddie, the government entities that helped make all the bad loans. The Federal Reserve printed money, not only drove interest rates down to zero, but actually printed money to buy every single mortgage that was originated that got sold onto the secondary market as a way to drive down the costs to get people into houses, to drive down the interest rate so they could buy more homes so prices would go back up. When we look at the federal government, we look at the legislative branch, the executive branch. We're getting into an election season, right? What's the mantra? It's the economy stupid, jobs, jobs, jobs. For us as local people in a real city with a real budget doing real things, it's very clear that the federal government and the state government will gladly do transactions that bump up jobs and GDP in the macro if we will, in the micro, take on enormous long-term obligations. If we will agree to take on all the responsibility to maintain and fix and service and take care of all this stuff, the bureaucrats and the politicians will gladly use that system to gin up more and more and more growth. I want to show you how this has worked post-World War II. In 1949, right as the GI Bill and the Federal Housing Administration and all the Interstate Highway Act and all the stuff that was going to create this great growth surge in America was starting to take off, you had a population of a little over 33,000 people. When we look at and analyze the feet of pipe per person, at that period of time, you had 5 feet of pipe per person. So a person would have to, over the course of a generation living here, generate enough excess wealth and prosperity to maintain and sustain 5 feet of pipe. When we look at fire hydrants per 1,000 people, it's about 2.4. When we fast forward to today, your population has grown to 121,000. But your feet of pipe per person is now 50. And your number of fire hydrants per 1,000 people is now at 51.3. You've increased your population by 3.5 times by taking on burdens that are 10 times and 20 times greater. Now you could say, okay, Chuck, I get this, but we are creating wealth and prosperity and jobs and economic growth. In 1950, the median household income in Lafayette in today's dollars was $27,700. Today is $45,000. You've increased your obligations by 10 to 20 times, and you've increased the wealth of your families and households by only 1.6. This is the real world. This is where we live. These are the decisions that we have to make. And let me give you just a little kind of glimpse into how this has all happened and how at the local level we've got to get control of what we're doing here. If you look at the traditional kind of building that people did for thousands of years, the little shop in front of the house, right? And why would people do that? Because when they're bootstrapping a business, when they're trying to get a business started, they can't hire employees. They've got to be there to manage the shop, and they've got to watch the kids at the same time, and they've got to balance all these things. So they put this little storefront up front, right? I was in Pompeii, and they had these things there from, thousands of years ago, right? This is the way we build. And when you do that, then over time you could grow that business and maybe build a residence up on top and watch the shop that way. And then over time you could get enough wealth to move out and maybe have an employee live up there or split it up and rent it out and have a dual income stream. This is how cities and families built wealth for generations. When we created the FHA and when we started this whole housing boom, one of the provisions was that the federal government would not back any home mortgage where you had more than 18% of the floor area as commercial. So if you wanted to do this, too bad. If you wanted to build a single-family home, we've got all kinds of programs for that. We'll write down your down payment. We'll subsidize the interest. We'll create a secondary market. But if you want to build something like this, the kind of stuff we've built for thousands of years, go ahead. We're not going to say you can't at the federal level, although we'll encourage cities to adopt ordinances that say you can't. But we're not going to create a market for it. So you have to go to a bank, you have to have a huge down payment, you have to have a higher rate of interest, you have far more risk. We basically made this an uneconomical option by the way we have tilted the scales in the other direction. If we're going to pretend that this is some kind of magical market, that the prices of housing actually reflect these market forces, the hand of Adam Smith kind of moving things around. We're kidding ourselves. We are at the whims, without a plan, of all these forces around us. And if we don't step back and take stock of where we're at, we're just going to be kind of floating in the breeze, right? You look at Plan Lafayette and you look at the development code you've adopted, and it never mandates density. It never mandates any type of development pattern. What it does is it creates options in the marketplace, options that have been taken away from you. Incidentally, let's look at what housing prices have done post-2008. From a condition that we all agree was a bubble, the market tried to equilibrate, right? Tried to find a balance, a real price of housing that would meet sellers and buyers together in a non-manipulated market. And what have we done? That's not a future that I want. That's not a future that you want. And I look at the city of Lafayette. Not only are you leaders in this region, not only are you leaders in this state, but you're leaders nationally in taking a really hard look at why things are so financially difficult here. Your leaders could adopt a tax increase. They could do tiny little, incremental increase in taxes and get that passed and get that approved. Some of you would be angry. Some of you would be happy. But you know what that's doing? That's kicking the can down the road. And what your city has done instead, said, no, we're going to stop. We're going to figure out what's going on. We're going to try as best we can to plan for the future. And we're going to try to do something a little bit different than the way things have always been. And I have a huge amount of respect for you for that. Thank you.
Chuck Marohn, everybody. All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate both of you for all of that information. If you're just joining us on the radio, we are at the Light Center this evening for a presentation talking about the plan for Lafayette, basically. And we have invited folks down here. Yes, there is still time to come. We will wrap up the radio portion, if you will, by 7 o'clock tonight. Chuck Marohn is an engineer, a planner, and the president of the nonprofit organization Strong Towns. Randall O'Toole, a Cato Institute senior fellow working on urban growth, public land, and transportation issues. Both of these gentlemen have made some great points this evening. And I think it's hopefully opening some minds, some hearts, so we can kind of think about some of these issues. If you would like to ask a question, I want you to feel free to do that. You don't have to be nervous. You don't have to be intimidated or anything like that. Now, what I would ask you to do, since there's only one of me and lots of you guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand over here, and if you would like to ask your question, that would be, extremely helpful, so I don't have to run up and down the stairs, if you don't mind. I think we already have a question right here in the front row, please. And Rob will hand you the microphone. Please remember that for the most part you need to ask your question and hand it back to Rob just so we can get as many questions answered as possible. Thanks.
I'd like to ask this question to both of you. And Chuck, you first.
Great.
The same politicians that are bringing us the plan are the same ones that brought us the Costco pilot program on the outskirts of town.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that? And is that consistent with your vision of financial responsibility to the town?
Yeah, I will comment on that. In terms of the last half of your question, generally no, it's not. But I want to say this. Plan Lafayette marks a shift. And I think it's an important shift between a city that has no plan, which you have not had a plan, and what I would call business as usual, the old boys club. We all know how things get done in a city, right? You know somebody who knows somebody, you go scratch someone's back. That's the way things have always been done, right? And I think there's a certain momentum to that. I don't know if that's manifest in this Costco development or not. But the way you start to deal with those things is by saying, look, we need some transparency here. We need the real numbers. We need data. We need to know what's actually going on. And we need to chart a course based on those kind of things, not essentially the gut reaction. I'm pro-subsidy. I'm anti-subsidy. What process can I use to get that done? So in general, a strong towns approach is not an approach that needs subsidies. It's a more incremental approach, not one where you're trying to do wholesale changes. But I think that the projects here that you're doing are a byproduct of this shift, and the answer is not less, get rid of the plan. It's actually start implementing your plan, because the plan is going to open up a lot more opportunities besides what I think is a desperation move to subsidize bad development.
Okay, do you have a follow-up for that very quickly? Yes, just 1 second, please. And please get close to the microphone. Thank you.
But isn't the flaw in that is what Adam Smith has always said?
Uh-huh.
The flaw is man. In that you're still going to have politicians that are going to want to do favors. That's not going to change.
Right. No, I totally agree. And I think, if you're going to have a system of government with roads and sewer and water and lift stations and development and business, and you're going to have the fallibility of man. I would like to have that in my mayor and city council that I can, run against and go meet than in my politician in Washington, D.C. I don't think that has anything to say on whether we should plan collectively for our future or not.
Okay, Rob, I have a question down here first. I'm sorry.
Oh.
Mr. O'Toole?
Yeah.
Please, sir.
I would just make the same point as the questioner, Chuck, and that is that just because you have a plan doesn't mean things are any more transparent, that you eliminate the good old boys club or anything like that. When I go to a Walmart or a Costco, if it doesn't have the grocery item that I want, I'll go to a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's or whatever store will have the grocery item I want. I don't need a government plan telling grocers what to stock on their shelves. They will respond to the market. They'll respond to me. But when you have government planning, it just creates opportunities for more good old boy clubs, for more crony capitalism, rather than more transparency.
And I agree with that in essence, but I think in the real world at a city level, if you're going to have tax subsidies, for example, which you've collectively decided you are going to have tax subsidies, and if you haven't, the state has mandated a process whereby it can happen regardless of what your elected officials think. How are you going to decide where those go? How are you going to decide who gets that? How are you going to decide where that type of building should take place? To me, I get the market principles behind it, but now you're throwing this other part in it, and you've got to have an approach.
All right, we'll go to our next question here. Go ahead, sir.
For the benefit of folks who don't know, my name's Kevin Blanchard. I'm the Public Works Director here for the City Parish Government. I just want to kind of set this up by saying we recently finished an evaluation of the Condition 1 and Condition 2 roads in the unincorporated part of the parish. Condition 1 means this road is likely to revert to gravel if we don't do anything soon. Condition 2 is it's on its way to Condition 1 road. To bring those Condition 1 and Condition 2 roads up to a standard, it will cost us $40 million. Now, in the current year's budget, I have $300,000 to do overlay in the unincorporated area of the parish. And so I am curious, under both of these approaches, and to hear from both of you, if I can, until self-driving cars come, how should we approach that problem?
Well, I would say you have the wrong system of paying for your roads. You're paying for your roads out of whatever state gas taxes the state will share with you. Gas taxes are a user fee if they're spent on roads, or not a user fee if they're spent on transit. And then you have property taxes and other taxes. That's the wrong way of paying for roads. You should pay for roads using a mileage-based user fee system, which is now technically feasible. That's going to take a few years to implement. In the short run, you should look at roads and put the money where it's needed the most. And instead of subsidizing Costco's, instead of subsidizing buildings like this one, which received huge subsidies to be built, and I don't think it's generating any value to aside from tonight's meeting, of course, to pay for
Good
it.
answer. Good answer.
Instead of doing all these subsidies, you should put the money where the essential needs are, which are schools, roads, and policing. and not in all these other frills. You should put your money into meat and potatoes before you put your money into dessert.
And I would agree wholeheartedly that we didn't finance roads in the right way. I wrote a whole book about this and suggested some other ways in which we should go about connecting supply and demand. The implications of that, though, here in Lafayette are two. First of all, we don't even decide how we tax. The state's decided it for us. And maybe we need to have representatives go down to the Capitol and say, let us experiment and change our tax system. That would be incredible. I would love that. But with the system that we have, the implications of actually charging people for what they use are that in those red areas I showed you on the map out on the edge, you're going to pay a lot more. Your feedback that you're going to get in a market-based system is that this is really, really expensive. I welcome that feedback. I think that feedback is a necessary component of a good development pattern. But right now, you're not getting that feedback. What you're getting, the feedback is, wow, Kevin's got a $40 million bill and only $300,000 to pay for it. That's not working. I'm mad at Kevin. I'm mad at the city. I don't want my taxes to go up. I would like better feedback. But with the system that we have, you're not going to get that anytime soon.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi. Yes, under the present Louisiana property tax structure, we pay about 1% of the value on raw land, whether there's anything on or not. Then we pay 1.5% on the value of the improvements on the land. Mm-hmm. If you have a building on a $100,000 piece of land, you pay 1%. If you have a $1.5 million building, you pay 1.5%. So the result is the improvements on the land pay a 50% higher property tax than the land itself. And if you're agricultural land, you pay basically nothing. The Costco deal is a good example where $10, $15 million worth of property was paying $300 a year in property taxes. My question to you guys is, with that economic force in place, is it possible to develop a plan that can overcome that huge burden?
Go ahead.
I'll start first. I think the answer to your question is it possible? Yes. Is it really hard? Yes. I mean, I tend to be sympathetic to the Georgists who prefer land taxation. I think it's wrong to punish people when they improve their property. I actually think improving your property should be a benefit for everybody. You're creating wealth in the community. And, so I would more value a land tax than a property tax if I had to weigh the two. That being said, what I'm suggesting and what Plan Lafayette starts you on the path towards is a conversation about how you do that. How do we create, given this blunt instrument we have, which is really what the property tax system you've described is, given this blunt instrument, how do we send the market, how do we let market signals get through to people when they're buying and selling property so that they know, hey, long term, I live on the end of a 1,000-foot cul-de-sac with 3 other people. I'm going to have a big expense here at some point. That's not really factored into our system today. And there are ways to do it, but they're not as clean as if we could change some of those tax rules.
Well, I live on the end of a 2/3 of a mile cul-de-sac with about a couple dozen other families, and we just, our roads were declining, and so we assessed ourselves $1,700 per family and repaved the road. Some people didn't like it, but we all did it, and now we have a nice road, and the system works. The thing is, we made a decision when we decided to live out in what is essentially a rural area. I live in a community of 380 people, and they're very low density, so it's really rural. We made a decision that we were going to be willing to pay those extra costs. We pay extra when somebody ships something to us, or at least the shipper pays extra because it costs more to ship to a rural area than a city. There's all kinds of ways in which we pay extra costs. We're willing to pay those extra costs. I don't want the city or the state social engineering me into trying to live in a way that's cheaper for them, not better for me. And that's what you get when you follow this path of saying, okay, this is the existing tax system. Let's design our city around the tax system. That's stupid. Design the city around what people in the city want today And if people change their minds tomorrow, let them change their minds tomorrow, and don't make long-term plans that foreclose the ability of people to change their minds. And if the tax system isn't working, change the tax system. Don't try to change people's lifestyles.
And I have a respectful follow-up question to you, because this is some of the things that we deal with all the time. One of the trade-offs that you've made, and one of the policy decisions that you've made as a community, which is very similar to everybody else, is we want to have police protection, fire protection, and those emergency response services in all these places. So if I choose to live, I grew up on a farm way outside of town. We knew that if you called the ambulance, they weren't going to get there for a half hour, right? If the barn caught on fire, no fire truck was going to put that out. But now today, we got a paved road out there, right? And it's got to be paved to city standards, so it's got to be really wide so that 2 fire trucks can pass and all this stuff. That's a policy decision that you've made. You've said, we have a responsibility of public health, safety, welfare, and so we've got to build to these standards so we can get emergency vehicles out there. What's the give and take with that? I guess I'm asking, do you acknowledge that at the end of the day, we would have essentially if we're going to have like a private road, a private cul-de-sac that we maintain to our own standards, then this public has to be able to accept essentially a lower standard of emergency response.
I don't necessarily accept that. With good transportation systems in cities and suburban areas, you can have rapid emergency response, provided you don't have governments trying to make your roads slower and streets slower. But if you have a good, adequate transportation system, you can have faster emergency response. But that's only part of the issue. The issue really is, should the government have a say in how you live based on its tax structure, or should you decide how you live and the government try to respond to that? And the way I think it should respond to that is take a look at your property tax bill. Try to break out where every single dollar in that bill is going. I bet only a small fraction of it is going to fire and police. I bet large chunks of it are going for things that you don't want, that you don't benefit from, and you may never even see, except for once in a while you come down to a place like this.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to go to the lady here in the middle. Ma'am.
Thank you. I'm a real estate agent, so I do look at both sides of the issue all the time, deal with people who want to live in urban environment as well as rural, so we have to cater to different kinds of buyers. I'm really glad Kevin is here tonight because I have a quick question for him. What was spent within the last 40 years in improving, air quotes, downtown Lafayette?
Kev's way up on top.
I know fortunes have been poured into the streets, the lights, the signage, building improvements to attract consumers, to attract entertainment, to attract drinkers, to attract eaters.
Okay, Kevin is coming right now. I tell you what, Rob, if you'll meet Kevin real quick. Rob, Kevin, you don't even have to come all the way down there. Thank you. Just a quick response, please.
I think historically, over the last 40 years, the money that we've spent in downtown Lafayette pales in comparison to where we spent in the rest of the city, just because downtown Lafayette is such a smaller area. We've had the Jefferson Street Streetscape project, which was, I think, about a total, when it all said and done, of $15 to $20 million. And I don't know that there are a lot of people who debate whether or not that had a positive impact on the development downtown. Put that in perspective, $15, $20 million will get us a few more miles of a 4-lane road somewhere, and we've done a lot of that work over the last few years. I hope that answers your question. I'd really like to hear from these two, though.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we're going to hear from them. And, ma'am, thank you very much for your question. Appreciate that. When you have more questions, I think the thing that's going to be easiest now is if we come down here, I'm going to take this gentleman's question after we get a response on the last issue, then the gentleman behind him, and if you'll come and line up here, we'll try to get to it as quickly as possible so everybody can get their questions in. Gentlemen, would you like to respond to what Kevin had to say? Anybody want to add any comments
I don't
there?
have
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Sir, if you'll speak closely here.
Yeah, Mr. O'Toole, Mr. Marohn, thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed the debate. My question's to Mr. O'Toole. You're central to some of your argument was the value, the sort of unquestioned value of home ownership and the benefits that it has. it really seemed like the only thing that homeownership doesn't do is cure cancer, according to your presentation. I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit, but I'm wondering, how much of that is really derived or can be explained by other variables like race or income or education rather than homeownership. For example, you stated that homeownership can really increase the value that a child gets in education, can increase some sort of a score, which would suggest there's some sort of a causal relationship there. But I just looked up, according to the U.S. Census, Louisiana has roughly 65% homeownership, and the states with the lowest homeownership are New York and California. So that seems to go against what you're saying. But the question is, I'd love for you to comment on whether or not the only problem we have in education in Louisiana is just to raise homeownership rates.
Well, I only said that homeownership had two benefits. One is that it aided small business formation, and that's been proven all around the world. And the other is that it did aid in school children's outcomes. And it's been carefully looked at by a lot of researchers who have adjusted for the education of the parents, the income of the parents, the race of the parents, all the factors you mentioned, and found that after you adjust for that, there's still a huge benefit in families that own their own homes for the educational outcomes for the children. And in fact, it would be cheaper, they calculated, to increase home ownership rates than it would be, and you get more outcomes for it, than it would be to spend more money on schools by increasing the number of teachers or raising teacher pay or whatever. So there are unquestionable benefits to home ownership. Now, not everybody should own their home. Not everybody needs to own a home, but everybody who wants to should be able to own a home. When you consider that 110 years ago, working class families were more likely to own their own homes than middle class families because they had felt like there were benefits to them to owning their own homes, and there wasn't an income threshold in those days that there is today. And the reason why there's an income threshold today is because government has imposed all these costs on us, especially in the coastal states, Oregon, Washington, California, Hawaii, Florida, Massachusetts, other coastal states, which is where the bubble was. There was no bubble in the central states. And now what I see in Plan Lafayette is, we're going to impose the same costs on home ownership. We're going to create the same volatility in home prices and create the same bubbles that California and Oregon and Washington did in the past few decades.
Can I just briefly connect home ownership and business startups? Dunkin' Donuts is not in Minnesota. Recently coming to Minnesota, opening 50 stores. I looked at their requirements for a new business. If you want to start a Dunkin' Donuts, you have to have $500,000 net worth and $250,000 of liquid capital. Right? What could be simpler than starting a donut shop? Think about your downtown. You get a little storefront. You've got plenty of space that you can put downtown. Start a little store. We'll pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. Just make donuts, right? All I need is a deep fryer and a counter and a register. Pretty low capital operation. I pour my sweat equity into it. I mortgage my house. So pull the equity out to start this business, and then Dunkin' Donuts opens up on the new interchange that you built out on the edge of town, and my business is wiped out. When we look at the relationship between home ownership and business startups, there is a really strong correlation in the system I described earlier, where you had the business and the house in the same place and they could grow incrementally over time. What's happened today is that business startups require one of two things. Either one, you got to be rich up front, or two, you have to be able to mortgage everything you have to make a go of it. That's not the American dream that I want. And I think Plan Lafayette, by emphasizing opportunities in the downtown, more flexibility in your codes and your ordinances, pave the way for a lot more business startup opportunities than our current model does.
Okay, and we'll go to this gentleman's question next, and then I also have a question about quality of life issues. All right, sir, please speak closely.
Great. Yes, for Mr. O'Toole, you showed an image of River Ranch, and I don't know if you know the history of River Ranch here in Lafayette, but it's essentially been the most successful large-scale development in Lafayette's history. And one of the interesting things is that it was also known as Waiver Ranch because it was essentially illegal to build under our existing codes when it was built. So they had over 130 waivers to the existing laws. Now, you've represented that Plan Lafayette is mandating where people live as if we're living in Oregon. Okay, well, we're not Oregon, and actually, after the plan got adopted, the Unified Development Code was adopted, and it actually did two things contrary to what you've been talking about. First of all, it solidified the right of developers to build single-family conventional subdivisions out on the outskirts of town. So the government's not telling people you can't do that at all. It's continued to authorize that. What it did is it gave people for the first time in our community the freedom to go ahead and develop projects like River Ranch that are higher in density that were previously illegal. So I want to, are you opposed to giving more freedom to developers to match what people want in our community? Or are you going to tell us from Portland what we need to do here?
I don't live in Portland, so don't say I'm from Portland. I used to live there. I hope I never have to go back. Portland, to me, is where Lafayette is headed. Portland had a plan like Plan Lafayette in 1979. It seemed mild, it seemed benign. Then in 1989, they made it a little stricter. In 1999, a little stricter. It's been getting stricter and stricter all the time today. And there are lots of places in Portland where if your house burns down, you're not allowed to rebuild it. You're required to build an apartment because they decided that your neighborhood would be better as multifamily than as single family. Nobody thought that that was going to be where they were going to end up in 1979, and yet that's where Portland is today. I don't think Plan Lafayette needs to exist. I don't think zoning needs to exist. Get rid of zoning, get rid of planning, get rid of all of it. Let people build whatever they want. If they want to build density, fine. If they want to build low density, fine. We don't need all of this government interference telling people what they can and can't do. To me, the freest place in America is Houston, where they have no zoning. They have some very limited codes, like setbacks and height limits and so on, but they don't say, once you meet this code, you have to be in a single-family home or a multifamily home or a business or whatever. You can do whatever you want as long as you meet these very minimum codes. That, to me, is ideal. And Houston never had a housing bubble. Of course, Lafayette didn't really have a housing bubble either, although it might in the next one. But the thing about Houston is it's been growing faster than any city in America. 120,000 people a year, and just even with that growth, that's not for the city, that's for the urban area. Even with that growth, they were able to meet housing needs and housing demand without any bubble, without any huge increase in housing prices. There's some multifamily housing because some people want to live in multifamily housing. There's a lot of single-family housing because a lot of people want to live in single-family housing. That, to me, is the future that Lafayette should be headed towards, not Portland, which is where Plan Lafayette is headed.
Interesting. At the end of the day, I used to do zoning administration for a few years, filling in with some cities, and I tend to agree that we would be better off without 90% of our zoning codes, right? The problem is when we start to do that, what happens? All of you freak out, right? We come in and say, you know what? Your neighbor can convert their single-family home into a duplex. You go, oh, I don't want any of those in my neighborhood. And so it's this constant struggle back and forth. Plan Lafayette, and you included some of the diagrams in your presentation, with the opacity of the glass and the awnings and stuff. In the downtown, there is a conscious shift away from the very, very restrictive use codes, where we go in and we say, you can do this on this property, but on the property next door, you can't do this. And here's the 5 things you can do here, and here's the 8. The shift is away from that. And it's saying, instead of that, we know you're not going to get rid of all zoning here in Lafayette. So what we're going to do is say, all right, in a place like the downtown, we're going to provide a lot of flexibility, and we're going to say the thing we're going to regulate is how you interact with your neighbors. Because really, at the end of the day, what do we care about? We don't care what you're doing in your building. We don't care if you're a plumber or an accountant or a restaurant or a person, living in a residence. What we care about is essentially the conflicts you create with your neighbors. And when you've got 40 acres, I grew up on an 80-acre farm, What the heck do we need zoning for? We didn't have neighbors, right? But when you live with a shared common wall in a street and a person right across the street 30 feet from you, you need some basic guidelines to make sure that everybody's acting in a way that is going to be a good neighbor. That's what the Uniform Development Code does. It makes a very important shift from overly restrictive use-based codes to far more flexible, I would call them neighborly codes.
There's a better solution, and that's the Houston solution. In Houston, most people don't have zoning, but they do have homeowner associations and protective covenants or deed restrictions. And you have a choice. If you move to the Houston area, you can move to a neighborhood that has really strict deed restrictions, or you can only paint your house certain colors. And if you have an RV, it has to be in the garage. It can't be out in front. You can't leave a rusty pickup truck on your front lawn. Or you can move into a neighborhood that has really loose homeowner restrictions, where you can have a rusty pickup on your front lawn. You can paint your house pink, but maybe you can't have a grocery store out of your house. Or you can move into a neighborhood that has no restrictions at all and no homeowner association. And if you move into a neighborhood that has no homeowner association, but you want one, all you have to do is petition your neighbors, and if 75% of them agree, you can create a homeowner association, and then if 75% agree, you together can write your own restrictions that apply to your neighborhood. And at any time, your homeowner association can change the restrictions if 75% of the people agree. So it's a very flexible system. If you live in a neighborhood that's kind of declining and some developer says, we want to change your neighborhood, but you've got a homeowner association, all they have to do is come in and negotiate with your homeowner association and see what does it take to get you to let us change your neighborhood. And that happens a lot too. You don't have to go to the city. The developer doesn't have to go to the city and fight with you over whether the city is going to let them change your neighborhood in ways that you don't want. You get to decide. You and your neighbors are in control. And if you don't want to have any controls at all, about half the neighborhoods in the city of Houston itself have no homeowner association at all. So you've got a lot of flexibility.
Real briefly, just because I'm going to get yelled at by some friends that are watching the webcam from Houston, who will want me to jump down your throat and say they have some of the most restrictive codes. They don't have Euclidean zoning. They do have really restrictive codes through their street standards and through their other development building codes. I had a friend that did development in Houston, and his job was basically to get permits. And he'd say it would take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, really onerous permitting process. So Houston's kind of held up sometimes as like a libertarian utopia. It's close enough. Go there. Check it out.
Okay, very good. We're going to go to Joyce. Then after Joyce, we'll have this gentleman's question. I do want to let y'all know that if in the event I kind of interrupt you at any point, that's only because we're going to have to rejoin News Talk 96.5 KPEL for our legal ID and rejoin at the top of the hour with the network. But if you are willing to stay here, we will continue to have this open discussion, continue the conversation, and you'll still be able to get it at kpel965.com. Joyce?
Okay, well, I almost forgot what I was going to say standing up here, but one of the things that I communicate with a lot of people through the organization Go Free, and I hear the citizens talk about what they want, and they want better roads. They are tired of driving. I've got a road to my house that I can't even take home anymore. They want police and fire protection. It's called priorities, and the city administration and the state and federal need to focus on what their priorities should be, and that's where our tax dollars need to go. I think we're exhausted with the programs that take our tax dollars away for some other program. Like Mr. Blanchard said, well, $4 or $5 million might have paved a few miles of road. Or I heard somebody in the administration say $1 million, that's chump change. Well, maybe it is to them, but it's not to the taxpayer. So I'd like to know how we can get government, local government, to focus on the priorities that they're supposed to focus on and then move forward on these other plans. Thank you.
It's called the electoral process. You elect leaders who reflect your opinions rather than somebody else. Now, the problem is that they very quickly can get captured by the good old boy system that Mr. Marohn mentioned. But you just have to re-elect new leaders all the time, maybe get some term limits so they can only be in office 1 or 2 terms. It's not easy, but that's the problem with anything. That's the problem especially with government. That's one reason why I don't think government should be doing a lot of the things it's doing. It should be deauthorized from doing those things because it just promotes crony capitalism, just promotes good old boy systems. And to me, plans like Plan Lafayette simply create even more avenues for that, not less.
Not really. I mean, I think if we could magically transform ourselves back to that 1905, style of government where the federal government was not involved in local economic development, local land use, local transportation. If we could magically transform back to that, I would say we don't need a plan. We've got a framework that's been in place for thousands of years. It'll work just great. Right now, though, we don't live in that world. We live in a different world, one that comes with a lot of mandates, comes with a lot of strings, comes with a huge amount of incentives for us to do really damaging things to our community. And I think, to me, the response to that is not to put our heads in the sand, but to work collectively to figure out an approach that works for us. And that is the definition of a plan.
Okay, sir.
Yes, I would like to ask y'all, what tax methods do other cities use in order to implement things or to change things or in progression of the community? On that question, I'd like to make a couple of statements. Lafayette is a donor parish. We give a lot of our tax money on roads to other parishes. I think y'all should know that. Also, our tax structure here in Lafayette is not conducive to taking care of the roads or the drainage that's necessary for the parish of Lafayette. I live in the southern part of the parish, and believe me, I know what drainage is and what the lack of it is. And we do have the money to address these things, but money has been used wrongly in the past years with this administration that we have presently. One other thing is, on the tax question, the city of Lafayette utility department gives a lot of their budget, a lot of their profit over to the general budget. And I'd like to know, with this money coming in, how you gentlemen would set up a system in order to pay for our needs here in Lafayette Parish.
Okay, who'd like to go first?
I think this is your more bailiwick.
Randall?
As far as roads go, I already mentioned a mileage-based user fee system. Now, we've been paying for roads with gas taxes. My home state of Oregon was the first state to impose a gas tax in 1919, and by 1930, every other state had a gas tax and dedicated 100% of those taxes to roads. And that's paid for virtually all, that and federal gas taxes have paid for virtually all state highways in the country. But that hasn't paid for local roads because the states haven't shared enough of the gas taxes with local governments. Instead, we're seeing more and more gas taxes being diverted to other uses. Texas sends 25% of their gas taxes to schools. The federal government and collectively the state governments together spend about 20% of gas taxes on mass transit. So we're using the gas tax to subsidize other things. If we would stop doing that, we would have some more money. In the long run, though, gas taxes aren't going to cut it. Even with the increase in population, and even if driving continues to increase per capita, which is it's leveled off as of 2007, but if it starts to increase again per capita, even with that, cars are getting so much more fuel efficient so fast that gas tax revenues are going to continue to decline even as the cost of maintaining the highway system stay the same or increase. So we need to come up with a better system, and I like the mileage-based user fee system. We can use it. We can use a system that protects people's privacy, but make sure that the roads you pay for are the ones that you drive on, and to make sure that the roads that you drive on are the ones that you pay for, which is the way a market system ought to work. And if you have at the end of a cul-de-sac and you and your neighbors aren't willing to pay for it, then maybe it's going to get changed to a gravel road, and that's the way it is. But if you want it paved, then you pay for it. I don't see anything wrong with that, and I would like to change to that system as quickly as possible. Oregon is going to transition to that system over the next few years. We don't know how long it's going to take. I was one of the first few people to volunteer to be a part of it, and hopefully within a decade or so, everybody in Oregon will be doing that, and within a decade after that, other states will have followed.